The door should not have opened. Seren Holloway knew this with the bone-deep certainty of someone who had spent her entire life understanding which doors were meant for people like her and which were not. The servant's entrance was 3 corridors back, through the narrow passage that smelled of coal smoke and yesterday's bread. She should have turned left at the second landing, not right. She should have followed the housekeeper's directions precisely. Instead, she stood frozen in the doorway of what could only be described as a cathedral of books, her fingers still clutching the garment bag containing Lady Pembroke's hastily repaired ball gown, her heart hammering against her ribs like a bird, desperate for escape. The room was enormous. Floor-to-ceiling shelves lined every wall, leather-bound volumes gleaming in the firelight like sleeping dragons guarding their hoard. A massive desk dominated the far end, papers scattered across its surface in organized chaos. The air smelled of aged paper, wood smoke, and something sharper underneath. Brandy, perhaps, or whiskey. But it was the man by the window who stopped her breath entirely. He stood with his back partially turned, one hand braced against the window frame, the other holding a crystal glass that caught the light. He'd removed his mask. She could see it discarded on a nearby table, and his dark hair was disheveled, as though he'd been running his fingers through it repeatedly. His evening coat had been abandoned over a chair, leaving him in shirt sleeves and waistcoat, improperly informal for a gentleman at his own masquerade ball. Because this was his ball. This was his house. This was the Duke of Thornhaven, and Seren had just walked into his private sanctuary uninvited. She took a step backward, praying the door wouldn't creak, praying he hadn't heard her enter, praying she could disappear back into the maze of corridors and pretend this moment had never happened. The floorboard beneath her foot groaned like a dying animal. He turned. Seren had heard stories about Corvin Ashford, the Duke of Thornhaven. Everyone in Belmar had. The tragic Duke, they called him. The cold Duke. The Duke who had buried his father 8 months ago and emerged from mourning as something harder, sharper, more remote than before. The Duke who was expected to announce his engagement to Lady Margot Sinclair before the season ended, uniting 2 of the most powerful families in the realm. The stories had not mentioned that his eyes were the color of winter storms, gray with flecks of blue that seemed to shift in the firelight. They had not mentioned the sharp architecture of his face, all angles and shadows, beautiful in the way that dangerous things were beautiful. They had not mentioned the way he looked at her now, not with anger or outrage, but with something far more unsettling. Curiosity. "You're not a guest," he said. His voice was low, controlled, carrying the weight of someone accustomed to being obeyed without raising his tone. Serene's mouth went dry. "No, Your Grace. I was delivering a dress. For Lady Pembroke. I took a wrong turn, and 3 wrong turns at minimum." He set down his glass with deliberate precision. "The servants' corridors don't connect to this wing at all." Her face burned. "The housekeeper's directions were perfectly clear, I'm certain." He moved toward her, and Seren fought the urge to retreat. Running would only make things worse. Running would confirm she was exactly what she appeared to be, a trespasser, an intruder, someone who didn't belong in his gilded world. Which means you either ignored them deliberately, or you're remarkably terrible at following instructions. "I have an excellent sense of direction," she heard herself say, and immediately wished she could swallow the words back. His eyebrow lifted fractionally. "Do you? Under normal circumstances, these corridors are designed to confuse invaders and unwanted visitors. Yes." A ghost of amusement crossed his features before disappearing behind that mask of aristocratic control. "It appears they're functioning exactly as intended." Seren clutched the garment bag tighter, using it as a shield between them. "I apologize for the intrusion, Your Grace. If you could simply point me toward the servants' passage, I'll deliver this dress and trouble you no further." He was close now, close enough that she could smell cedar and ink and something darker, richer, the whiskey from his glass, perhaps, lingering on his breath. Close enough that she could see the exhaustion carved into the lines around his eyes, carefully hidden, but present nonetheless. "Who are you?" he asked, and the question held more weight than 3 simple words should carry. "Nobody of consequence. A seamstress's assistant. My mother owns a shop in—" The door behind her exploded open. Serene spun, her heart lurching into her throat as a flood of silk and diamonds poured into the study. 3 women. No, 4. Their masks pushed up onto their foreheads, their eyes bright with triumph and something hungrier underneath. "Your Grace." The woman in front was stunning, golden-haired and glacial, her crimson gown cut to emphasize every elegant curve. Lady Margot Sinclair. Seren recognized her from the society pages her mother sometimes brought home. "We've been searching everywhere. Your grandmother is asking for you, and I—" She stopped. Her gaze landed on Seren with the precision of an arrow finding its target. The silence that followed was devastating. Seren watched realization spread across their faces like poison through water. A man and woman alone. Door closed. His jacket removed. Her, a nobody, an intruder, standing close enough to feel his warmth. "Well," Lady Margot said, her voice dripping with something that masqueraded as sweetness but tasted like venom. "This is unexpected." And Seren knew, with horrible clarity, that her life had just become very, very complicated. The whispers started before Seren could draw breath to explain. She watched them spread through the cluster of women like wildfire catching dry grass. Glances exchanged, fans raised to hide curved lips, the particular rustle of silk that accompanied scandal finding its footing. Within the span of 3 heartbeats, she had been tried, convicted, and sentenced in the court of society's judgment. "Your Grace," Lady Margot continued, gliding further into the room with the confidence of someone who had never questioned her right to any space she occupied. "I do hope we haven't interrupted anything." Delicate. The emphasis on the final word was surgical, precise, designed to wound. The Duke's expression remained utterly impassive, but Seren noticed his shoulders straighten almost imperceptibly, a soldier preparing for battle. "Lady Margot, ladies, I wasn't aware my private study had become a destination on this evening's entertainment." "We were concerned." Another woman spoke, older, draped in sapphires that matched her icy gaze. Lady Sinclair, Seren realized, Margot's mother. "You disappeared so suddenly after the 3rd dance." Dear Margot was quite worried. "I'm touched by your concern. As you can see, I'm perfectly well." Perfectly well and perfectly accompanied. Lady Sinclair's attention shifted to Seren with the focused intensity of a predator assessing prey. "I don't believe I recognize your guest, Your Grace. The mask makes it so difficult to place faces at these affairs." Seren wasn't wearing a mask. She hadn't been wearing one when she entered. The comment was deliberate, a reminder that she didn't belong, had never been invited, was so far beneath notice that her face wasn't even worth remembering. "She's not," Seren began, but the Duke cut across her. "Miss Holloway is here at my invitation." The lie was so smooth, so immediate, that Seren nearly believed it herself. She turned to stare at him, but his gaze remained fixed on the women in the doorway, his expression revealing nothing. "Holloway," Lady Margot repeated, rolling the name across her tongue like she was tasting something unpleasant. "I'm not familiar with the family." "The Holloways are from Crestwick," the Duke said, and Seren felt the blood drain from her face. Crestwick was 300 miles away, far enough that no one in this room could easily verify or refute any claim he made. Miss Holloway's father was a scholar of some renown. She's been corresponding with my sister regarding certain historical texts in our library. Another lie, layered atop the first, building a fortress of fiction around her. "How academic," Lady Margot said. The word dripped with condescension. "Though I must say, Your Grace, the hour seems rather late for scholarly pursuits, and the door was closed. The draft from the corridor disturbs the older manuscripts. I always keep this door closed." His voice carried the particular patience of someone explaining something obvious to someone being deliberately obtuse. "Miss Holloway arrived shortly before you did to collect a volume my sister wished her to examine. She was just leaving." Seren recognized her cue. "Yes, leaving. Right now. Immediately." But when she moved toward the door, Lady Sinclair shifted to block her path, the movement subtle enough to seem accidental, but deliberate enough to communicate its message clearly. "Surely you'll stay for refreshments, Miss Holloway. Any friend of the family should be properly welcomed." The older woman's smile didn't reach her eyes. "I'm certain the Dowager Duchess would be delighted to make your acquaintance." A warning flickered across the Duke's face, quickly suppressed. "My grandmother has retired for the evening." "Has she? I saw her not 10 minutes ago, quite animated, discussing arrangements for the Fairchild dinner next week." Lady Sinclair's gaze never left Seren's face. She seemed particularly eager to meet anyone claiming friendship with her grandchildren. Claiming. The word was a knife, precisely placed. "I really must be going," Seren tried again. "My mother will be expecting me, and I—" "Nonsense." Lady Margot linked her arm through Seren's before she could retreat, the gesture appearing friendly, but functioning as a shackle. "You simply must stay. The night is young, and I'm absolutely desperate to learn more about these historical texts you've been studying. I adore history, don't I, Mother? You've never read a history book in your life, darling? Then this is the perfect opportunity to cultivate new interests." Margot's grip tightened. "Come, let's find you something to drink. You look rather pale." Seren looked desperately toward the Duke, hoping for intervention, rescue, anything. But his expression had shuttered completely. Whatever game he'd begun by lying about her identity, she was now a piece on the board, and pieces didn't get to choose their movements. "Your Grace," Lady Sinclair said, her voice carrying sweetened poison. "Shall we return to your guests? I believe the quartet is preparing for the final set." He had no choice. Seren understood that even as panic clawed at her throat, refusing would only confirm whatever suspicions they'd carried through that door. The only path forward led directly through the crowded ballroom, where every eye would turn to examine the mysterious woman who'd been found alone with the Duke of Thornhaven. "Of course," he said, and offered his arm to Lady Sinclair with mechanical courtesy. They moved as a procession through the corridors, Lady Sinclair on the Duke's arm, Margot maintaining her prison grip on Seren, the other women trailing behind like well-dressed vultures waiting for the feast. Seren's mind raced through impossible options. She could claim illness. She could faint. She felt close enough to fainting that it wouldn't require much acting. She could wrench free and run, scandal be damned, and spend the rest of her life as a cautionary tale whispered over tea. The noise hit her first when they reached the ballroom, music and laughter, and the particular buzz of hundreds of conversations layered atop one another. Then the heat. Bodies pressed together, candles blazing, the late summer warmth trapped beneath crystal chandeliers. And finally, the faces turning toward them with naked curiosity, recognition sparking as they identified the Duke, confusion dawning as they spotted the unknown woman being escorted like a prize. Or a prisoner. "There," Margot breathed, satisfaction evident in every syllable. "Now everyone knows you're here. Isn't that wonderful?" Serene understood then what was happening. This wasn't about protecting reputation or punishing impropriety. This was about control, about ensuring that whatever had occurred in that study could be shaped into whatever narrative best served Lady Margot and her ambitions. If Serene was presented as a friend of the family, any scandal would reflect on the Duke. If she was exposed as an intruder, she could be dismissed and punished, while Margot appeared magnanimous for not demanding harsher consequences. Either way, Margot won. A silver-haired woman materialized from the crowd, her bearing regal, her black gown severe, and her eyes sharp enough to cut glass. The Dowager Duchess of Thornhaven. It could be no one else. She assessed Serene with a single sweeping glance that seemed to catalog every thread of her clothing, every imperfection of her complexion, every indicator of her inadequate breeding. "Corvin," the Dowager said, her voice carrying clearly despite the surrounding noise. "I was under the impression you were entertaining important guests this evening, not collecting strays." The Duke's jaw tightened. "Grandmother, who is this person, and why is she touching Lady Margot's arm?" Serene realized with horror that she had, at some point, grabbed Margot's wrist in an unconscious attempt to free herself. She released it immediately, her face burning. "This," Lady Sinclair announced with barely concealed glee, "is Miss Holloway. Your grandson claims she's a friend of the family, though none of us seem to recall any previous mention of the connection." The Dowager's attention sharpened to a point. "Holloway? From where?" "Crestwick, apparently." "Crestwick." The old woman's lips pressed into a thin line. How convenient. A location too far for verification, yet close enough to sound plausible. The Duke stepped forward, positioning himself between Serene and his grandmother with a subtle shift of weight. "Miss Holloway is my sister's guest. Any questions about her presence should be directed to Inez, not subjected to public interrogation. Inez has been in the card room for the past hour. I've had eyes on her all evening." The Dowager's gaze didn't waver. "Try again, Corvin." Silence fell around them like a shroud. Serene felt the weight of 100 stares, the pressure of judgment, the terrible understanding that nothing she said would matter. She was a seamstress's daughter, caught in a Duke's private study. The truth would condemn her. Lies would condemn her further. There was no escape that didn't leave wreckage in its wake. Then, impossibly, she heard herself speak. "Your Grace, if I may." Every eye turned to her. The Duke's expression flashed warning, but Serene was beyond caring. If she was going to drown, she would do it with dignity. "I am exactly what I appear to be. A nobody who took a wrong turn in an unfamiliar house. His Grace was attempting to spare me embarrassment by fabricating a connection that doesn't exist. The fault is mine, not his. I'll leave now and trouble your family no further." She curtsied, the proper curtsy her mother had drilled into her, deep and respectful, and turned toward the nearest exit. The Dowager's voice stopped her cold. "Interesting. She lies badly, but she lies for someone else's benefit rather than her own." A pause, weighted with calculation. "That's rather rare." Serene froze, uncertain whether to continue walking or wait for further pronouncement. "Turn around, girl." She obeyed. The Dowager was studying her with an expression Serene couldn't read, something between suspicion and intrigue. "You have spine. I wasn't expecting that." The old woman gestured sharply. "Corvin, my sitting room. Now, bring your stray." "Grandmother, that wasn't a request." And she swept from the ballroom, leaving devastation in her wake, and Serene with the distinct feeling that she'd just jumped from the fire into something far more dangerous. The Dowager's private sitting room was smaller than Serene expected, decorated in deep blues and silvers that gave the space an underwater quality. The old woman settled into a high-backed chair, as though ascending a throne, gesturing for them to stand before her like subjects awaiting judgment. The Duke closed the door himself, dismissing the footman with a curt nod. His expression had hardened into something unreadable, a mask more effective than any silk and feathers disguise. "Explain," the Dowager commanded, "and this time, try the truth." Seren opened her mouth, but the Duke spoke first. She was delivering address for Lady Pembroke. She got lost, stumbled into my study, and had the misfortune of being discovered there by Lady Margot and her collection of gossip-hungry companions. His voice was clipped, factual. I invented a connection to spare her reputation. It was poorly executed. It was absurd. The Dowager's fingers drummed against the arm of her chair. Crestwick, historical texts, your sister's correspondence. Anyone with half a brain could see through it. Then perhaps it's fortunate that Lady Margot is not burdened with half a brain. Corvin. The warning in the Dowager's voice was unmistakable. It's true. He moved to the window, his back to them both, shoulders rigid with tension. She's been circling me for months, like a vulture waiting for the kill. This was exactly the ammunition she needed. Not to destroy me, but to manipulate me. To make me indebted. To force my hand toward the engagement everyone seems to expect. The Dowager's expression revealed a hint of agreement. Lady Margot is ambitious, her mother more so. But that doesn't explain why you felt compelled to protect this girl, rather than simply allowing the truth to emerge. Because the truth would have destroyed her. The Duke turned, and Seren was startled by the intensity in his gaze. She's a seamstress's assistant, found alone with a Duke in his private study. Even I understand what society does to women in that position. You've never cared what society thinks. I've never had someone else's life in my hands before. The words hung in the air between them. Seren felt the ground shift beneath her. A recalibration of power, of intention. He had lied to protect her, not for his own benefit, but for hers. You. The Dowager's attention snapped to Seren. "Speak. Who are you, really?" Seren drew herself up as straight as she could manage. "Seren Holloway, Your Grace. My mother owns a dress shop on Meridian Street. Holloway Alterations. We received an urgent commission for Lady Pembroke this afternoon. The original seamstress fell ill, so I was sent with the completed repairs." Meridian Street. The Dowager's nose wrinkled slightly. "That's in the milliner's quarter." "Yes, Your Grace. I know the area. Respectable enough, if modest." She studied Seren with unsettling intensity. "You speak well. Better than most merchants' daughters. My father was a tutor before he died. He believed education was the greatest gift he could give me, and my mother has continued his lessons as best she could." A tutor. Interest sparked in the Dowager's expression. For whom did he work? Seren hesitated. "Lord Ashwick's children, Your Grace, until the typhus took him 3 winters ago." The Duke turned sharply. "The Ashwick household employed your father?" "For 7 years. I grew up on the edges of their estate, playing with the younger children when lessons allowed." She felt heat rise to her cheeks. That was a different life. Before, the Dowager repeated slowly. "Before your father's death. Before your family's circumstances. Diminished." It wasn't a question, but Seren answered anyway. "Yes, Your Grace. Before everything changed." Silence stretched between them, thick with assessment and calculation. The Dowager's fingers continued their rhythmic drumming against the chair arm. Finally, she spoke. "You've created quite a problem, girl." Seren's stomach dropped. "Your Grace, I swear I meant no harm. If you'll simply let me leave." "Leave?" The Dowager laughed, a short, sharp sound without humor. And what do you imagine happens then? Lady Margot has already spread her version of events through half the ballroom. By morning, every drawing room in the city will be buzzing with stories of the mysterious woman found alone with the Duke of Thornhaven. Stories that can be corrected, Seren insisted desperately. The truth is irrelevant. The dowager's voice cut like ice. Perception is everything. You've been seen, you've been named, or at least described. You've been linked to my grandson in a context that suggests impropriety. The damage is done. Seren felt the floor shifting beneath her feet. Then what do you suggest? That I disappear? Change my name? Pretend this never happened? No. The dowager's eyes glittered with something that looked disturbingly like satisfaction. I suggest we do something far more interesting. The Duke's head snapped toward his grandmother. Whatever you're planning. What I'm planning, Corvin, is damage control. She rose from her chair, her posture commanding despite her age. Lady Margot wants to use this situation to trap you into an engagement. If you deny the girl, she'll destroy her and claim you've been conducting secret affairs. Hardly suitable behavior for a future husband. If you acknowledge her, Margot will suggest the connection is inappropriate and demand you prove your honor through immediate commitment to someone more suitable. Her, specifically. I'm aware of the trap. Then you should also be aware that there's only one way to escape it. The dowager moved toward Seren, circling her slowly, like a hawk assessing prey. You must beat Lady Margot at her own game. Seren's pulse quickened. How? By becoming exactly what my grandson claimed you were. A guest of this family. A friend of his sister. A respectable young woman whose connection to the Duke is entirely proper, and therefore entirely uninteresting to scandal mongers. Grandmother. The Duke's voice held warning. You cannot seriously be suggesting. I'm suggesting survival. The dowager stopped directly in front of Seren, her gaze piercing. If Miss Holloway vanishes, she becomes a mystery, and mysteries invite investigation. Lady Margot will have her people searching within days. They'll find the dress shop, the modest circumstances, and the dead tutor father. They'll construct a narrative of seduction and deception that will ruin this girl completely and taint our family by association. And if she stays? If she stays, she becomes known, visible, documented. A respectable connection whose presence at tonight's ball was entirely legitimate. The dowager's lips curved into something approximating a smile. Boring. Unremarkable. Exactly the kind of story that dies within a fortnight, because there's nothing scandalous to feed on. Seren's mind raced. You want me to pretend to be someone I'm not. I want you to be what you already are, a well-educated young woman of respectable background who happened to form a friendship with my granddaughter. The dowager waved a dismissive hand. The details hardly matter. What matters is presenting a united front that leaves Lady Margot with nothing to exploit. And what do I receive in return for this performance? The question surprised her as much as it seemed to surprise the dowager. The old woman's eyebrow rose fractionally. You negotiate with me? I didn't choose to be here, Your Grace. I was delivering a dress. Now you're asking me to lie to society, to put myself in the center of aristocratic politics I don't understand, to play a role that could destroy me if anything goes wrong. Seren lifted her chin. Yes, I negotiate. The Duke made a sound that might have been a suppressed laugh. The dowager studied her for a long moment. What do you want? First, my mother must be informed properly. She'll worry if I don't return tonight, and I won't have her thinking I've come to harm. Reasonable. A letter will be sent. Second, I want your word that, when this ends, however it ends, I won't be cast aside with nothing. I need a future beyond my mother's shop. References, connections, something that opens doors rather than closing them. Also reasonable, if somewhat ambitious. The dowager's expression held grudging respect. And third? Seren glanced at the Duke, who was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. I want to understand exactly what I'm walking into. No surprises. No games I don't know the rules for. If I'm going to play a part in your family's performance, I need to know why Lady Margot is so desperate to secure this engagement, what she's willing to do to achieve it, and exactly how far this deception extends. The sitting room fell silent. Finally, the dowager nodded slowly. You've got more spine than I credited you with, Miss Holloway. She turned to her grandson. What say you, Corvin? This was your lie to begin with. The Duke moved away from the window, stopping an arm's length from Seren. His gray eyes searched her face, looking for something she couldn't name. You understand this could take weeks, he said quietly. Possibly the entire season. You'd be living in this house, attending events, maintaining a fiction every moment of every day. I understand. You'd be leaving your mother alone with the shop, abandoning whatever life you'd built for yourself, stepping into a world that will never truly accept you, no matter how well you perform. I said I understand. And when it ends? His voice dropped lower. When you return to Meridian Street with your letters of reference and your connections and whatever else my grandmother deems adequate compensation. What then? Seren met his gaze without flinching. Then I build something better than what I had before. That's all any of us can do, Your Grace. Take the pieces we're given and make something worth keeping. Recognition dawned in his expression. Understanding, perhaps, or respect. He extended his hand. Do we have an agreement, Miss Holloway? She looked at his hand, elegant, powerful, belonging to a world she'd only glimpsed through windows and shop counters. Then she looked at the dowager, who watched with calculating patience. And finally, she thought of her mother, working by candlelight to meet impossible deadlines, of her father, who had taught her that circumstances could be survived, but dreams should never be abandoned. She took his hand. We have an agreement, Your Grace. His grip was warm and firm, and something passed between them in that moment, an acknowledgement that they were now bound together, two strangers united against forces neither had chosen to face. The door burst open. A young woman exploded into the room with all the subtlety of a summer storm, dark-haired like her brother, bright-eyed with excitement or alarm. Seren recognized her instantly from the Duke's earlier lie, the sister who supposedly knew her, who had supposedly invited her, whose existence was now suddenly and overwhelmingly present. Is it true? She demanded, her gaze sweeping from the Duke to Seren to the dowager and back again. Is she the one everyone's talking about? The mysterious woman from the study. Please tell me she's staying. Please tell me we're finally doing something interesting in this house. Inez, the Duke said, his voice carrying a warning that his sister entirely ignored. She has the most magnificent cheekbones. And look at her hair. So dark it's almost black. Grandmother, we absolutely must keep her. She'll be perfect. Perfect for what? Seren asked, somewhat alarmed. Inez's smile was blinding. For everything. And somewhere in the depths of the house, a clock struck midnight, marking the beginning of a deception that would either save them all or destroy everything. The room they gave her was called the Violet Suite. Seren stood in its center, turning slowly to absorb the impossible luxury surrounding her. The walls were papered in silk, the color of twilight, delicate silver patterns catching the candlelight like captured starlight. A four-poster bed dominated one wall, its hangings deep purple velvet, its mattress thick enough to drown in. Persian carpets cushioned the floor. A writing desk, positioned by the window, overlooked gardens that stretched into darkness. A sitting room adjoined through an archway, complete with its own fireplace, currently crackling with welcoming warmth. She had grown up in 3 rooms above her mother's shop. Her current bedroom could fit inside the Violet Suite's closet. The wardrobe is through here, Inez was saying, having appointed herself tour guide with boundless enthusiasm. Empty now, obviously, but we'll fix that tomorrow. Madame Vellicott is the best modiste in the city. She'll have you fitted for everything you need within the week. Everything I need, Seren repeated faintly. Day dresses, walking dresses, afternoon gowns, evening wear, ball gowns. You'll need at least 4 of those, possibly 5. Oh, and riding habits, though I suppose we should determine if you actually ride first. Do you ride? Horses? No, elephants. Inez laughed, throwing herself onto the settee in the sitting room with complete disregard for her expensive gown. Yes, horses. We have excellent stables. Corvin practically lives there when he's not buried in his study pretending to work. Pretending? A shadow crossed Inez's face, there and gone. He does work, obviously. Too much, actually. But lately it's become excessive, an excuse to avoid everything else. She waved a hand, as though dismissing an unpleasant thought. Never mind that. Tell me about yourself. The real you, not whatever story grandmother has approved for public consumption. Seren sank into a chair, suddenly exhausted. The events of the evening pressed down on her like physical weight. There's not much to tell. My father was a tutor. My mother is a seamstress. I help with the shop, deliver commissions, and occasionally assist with fittings for clients who can't travel to us. She glanced around the opulent room. This is the farthest I've ever been from home. How far is home? Perhaps 2 miles. Inez's eyes widened. 2 miles. And you've never... She stopped herself, seeming to recognize that finishing the thought might be unkind. Well, now you're here, and we're going to have such adventures. This isn't an adventure. It's a deception. The best adventures usually are. Inez sat up, suddenly serious. Listen, Seren. May I call you Seren? Miss Holloway seems absurdly formal given that you're going to be living here. Listen, I know this seems terrifying. I know you didn't ask for any of it. But you should understand something about my brother. What? He never lies. Never. It's actually one of his most aggravating qualities. This relentless, uncompromising honesty that makes social situations enormously awkward. He once told the Marchioness of Wrenworth that her new portrait made her look like a suspicious potato. Despite everything, Seren felt her lips twitch. He didn't. He absolutely did. She didn't speak to him for 3 months. Inez leaned forward, her expression intent. My point is that when Corvin lied for you tonight, when he invented that ridiculous story about correspondence and historical texts, it was completely out of character. He broke his own rules to protect someone he'd known for 5 minutes. He was being decent. Corvin is always decent, but he's never impulsive. He never acts without calculation. Inez's gaze held hers. Whatever made him lie for you, it matters, even if he doesn't understand it yet. Before Seren could respond, a soft knock announced the arrival of a maid, a young woman with copper hair and freckles scattered across her nose like cinnamon. Miss Holloway? I'm Bridget. I've been assigned as your lady's maid. She curtsied, then held up a silk nightgown. I've prepared everything for bed. Shall I help you undress? Serene had never had anyone help her undress in her life. Yes, thank you. Inez rose, squeezing Seren's hand as she passed. Sleep well. Tomorrow we'll begin your transformation. Transformation into what? But Inez was already gone, leaving only the echo of her laughter and the unsettling weight of her words. Later, Alone in the enormous bed with its impossibly soft sheets, Serene stared at the ceiling and tried to organize her chaotic thoughts. Somewhere in this house, the Duke of Thornhaven was likely doing the same, lying awake, wondering what madness had possessed him to drag a stranger into his family's political games. And somewhere beyond these walls, Lady Margot Sinclair was surely planning her next move. Sleep came eventually, but it was not restful. Morning arrived with evidence of invisible industry. Fresh flowers had appeared in the vase by the window. Water steamed in the basin. A dress, not her own, but something in soft dove gray that fit as though designed for her specifically, had been laid across the chair. Lady Inez sent it from her own wardrobe, Bridget explained, helping Serene into the gown with practiced efficiency. She said you're nearly the same size, and you couldn't possibly wear last night's dress again. The dress was finer than anything Serene had ever worn. The fabric whispered against her skin like water. She caught her reflection in the mirror and saw someone she barely recognized. The same face, the same dark hair, but transformed somehow. Elevated. It felt like wearing a disguise. Breakfast was served in a sunny room overlooking the gardens. Inez presided with inexhaustible energy, piling pastries onto Serene's plate while outlining the day's agenda. Madame Velicot arrives at 10. Then we have calls to make. The Ashfords always make Sunday calls. It's tediously expected. But that's perfect, because people will see you and start asking questions, which means we can establish the official story before Lady Margot poisons the well further. "Where is the Duke?" Serene asked, noting the empty chair at the head of the table. Tension crept into Inez's expression. "Corvin takes breakfast in his study. He's been doing that since Father died. Avoiding us, really, though he'd never admit it. And your grandmother? Doesn't rise before 10. She claims it's for health, but I think she simply enjoys making everyone wait for her." Inez's smile returned, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Finish eating. We have a transformation to complete, and time is not our ally." Serene obeyed, but her thoughts remained fixed on the absent Duke, the man who had lied for her, bound himself to her, and now apparently couldn't bring himself to share breakfast with his own family. What had broken him so thoroughly? And why did she feel, against all reason, that she might be the one capable of helping him heal? The Dowager Duchess descended the main staircase at precisely 10 o'clock, dressed in severe black that somehow conveyed more authority than any crown. Serene was waiting in the entrance hall as instructed, wearing a morning dress that Madame Velicot had produced with suspicious speed. Apparently the modiste kept emergency garments on hand for situations exactly like this. The gown was pale blue, respectable without being remarkable, designed to communicate propriety above all else. "You look acceptable," the Dowager pronounced, circling Serene with the same predatory assessment as the night before. "The dress helps. Your posture is good. Your complexion is clear." She paused. "Your hands need work." Serene glanced down at her fingers, calloused from needlework, rough from scrubbing, marked by countless small scars from misplaced pins. "My mother's shop doesn't allow for soft hands, Your Grace." "Then we'll ensure you're always wearing gloves in public." The Dowager's tone brooked no argument. "Hands tell stories. Yours tell the wrong one. And the right story would be that you're a gentleman's daughter, fallen on modest circumstances, being sponsored by this family as an act of charitable connection." The Dowager's lips curved without warmth. "It has the advantage of being mostly true, which makes it easier to maintain. I'm not a charity case. No, you're a strategic necessity disguised as a charity case." The old woman's gaze sharpened. "Make no mistake, Miss Holloway. I agreed to this arrangement because it serves my purposes, not because I have any particular concern for your well-being. You are a tool, useful for the moment, disposable when circumstances change. The sooner you accept that, the less painful this will be." The words landed like blows, but Seren refused to flinch. "And what are your purposes, Your Grace? Beyond preventing Lady Margot from trapping your grandson into an unwanted engagement?" Silence fell between them. The dowager's expression registered surprise, or perhaps recalculation. "Sit," she commanded, gesturing toward a small parlor off the entrance hall. Seren sat. The dowager settled across from her, arranging her skirts with meticulous care. When she spoke again, her voice had lost some of its cutting edge. "My son died 8 months ago. A sudden fever. There one day. Gone within the week. He was 53 years old and had never been sick a day in his life. We thought we had decades left with him." Her fingers pressed against the arm of her chair, knuckles whitening. "Corvin was in the north when it happened. Business with the estates that couldn't wait. By the time the message reached him, his father was already in the ground." Serene's breath caught. "He didn't get to say goodbye." "No. And he's been somewhere else ever since." The dowager's gaze fixed on something distant. "He performs his duties, manages the estates, attends Parliament, and appears at the necessary social functions. But he's not present. Not really. He's going through motions, waiting for something. I'm not even certain he knows what. And you think marriage would help? I think connection would help. Purpose beyond obligation. Someone who looks at him and sees the man rather than the title." The dowager's attention snapped back to Seren. "Lady Margot sees only the title. She would bore him within a month, drain whatever life remains in him with her endless social climbing and calculated charm. I'll not watch my grandson wither into emptiness, married to a woman who views him as a stepping stone." "Then why push the match at all?" "Because he refuses to choose otherwise." Frustration crept into the dowager's voice. "I've introduced him to every eligible woman in the county. Arranged dinners, theater outings, and country weekends. He treats them all with identical courtesy and identical indifference. Lady Margot simply pushed harder than the others, and her mother has political connections I cannot afford to alienate directly." Understanding dawned slowly. "You don't want him to marry Lady Margot, but you needed him to refuse the match himself. I needed him to want something, anything, enough to fight for it." The dowager's gaze bore into hers. "And then you appeared, a stranger he'd known for 5 minutes, for whom he immediately and inexplicably lied. Do you understand how significant that is?" Serene shook her head, uncertain. "Corvin doesn't lie. He doesn't act impulsively. He doesn't extend himself for people he has no obligation toward." The dowager leaned forward. "Yet for you, he did all 3. You sparked something in him, some instinct toward protection, toward action. You made him present, even if only for a moment. I was simply in trouble. Anyone would have done nothing. Anyone would have let you face the consequences of your accidental intrusion and moved on without a second thought. That's what people do, Miss Holloway. They protect themselves first." The dowager's voice dropped. "But not my grandson. Not with you." Serene didn't know what to say. The weight of the dowager's words pressed against her chest, making breathing difficult. "I'm not suggesting he's fallen in love with you," the old woman continued briskly, as though sensing the direction of Serene's thoughts. "Don't flatter yourself. But he responded to you in a way he hasn't responded to anyone since his father's death. That makes you valuable. Valuable as a tool. Valuable as a possibility." The dowager rose, signaling that the conversation was ending. "Whether that possibility becomes something more depends entirely on you. I've given you access to my home, my resources, my grandson's attention. What you do with it is your choice." She moved toward the door, then paused without turning. One warning, Miss Holloway. If you hurt him, if you use his vulnerability against him, or exploit his grief for your own gain, I will destroy you. Not quickly, not dramatically, but thoroughly. Every door in this city will close to you. Every connection you've made will evaporate. You will become invisible, and you will remain invisible for the rest of your life. She glanced over her shoulder. Do we understand each other? Perfectly, Your Grace. Good. Something almost like approval crossed the Dowager's severe features. Then let's see what you're capable of. She swept from the room, leaving Serene alone with racing thoughts and the unsettling realization that she'd just received both a threat and an invitation. Through the window, she could see the Duke crossing the garden, alone, head bowed, hands clasped behind his back. He moved like a man walking through fog, present in body, but absent in every other way. She thought of her father after his illness took hold, the way he'd retreated into silence rather than face his grief. She thought of her mother, working by candlelight to avoid quiet rooms where memories waited. She thought of herself, learning to survive by keeping her head down and her expectations low. Pain recognized pain, even across the vast gulf of circumstance. What would it take to reach him? And did she dare try? The days that followed established a rhythm Serene hadn't anticipated. Mornings belonged to Madame Vellicott and her army of assistants, who descended upon Thornhaven House with bolts of fabric, boxes of ribbons, and endless measuring tapes. Serene stood for hours while they constructed her transformation piece by piece. Gowns in every shade, from soft morning pastels to rich evening jewel tones, each designed to communicate respectability and understated elegance. Nothing too dramatic, the Dowager had instructed. She's not trying to outshine anyone. She's trying to belong. Afternoons belonged to Inez, who took her education in hand with terrifying enthusiasm. Names, titles, family connections, political alliances, social hierarchies. All of it delivered in a breathless stream while they walked the gardens or took tea in the sunlit parlor. Lady Pemberton is feuding with Mrs. Ashwick over something to do with a stolen rose cutting, so never mention gardens when they're both present. Lord Fairchild has a wandering eye and wandering hands. Stay out of arm's reach at all times. The Sinclair family controls 3 votes in Parliament, which is why grandmother tolerates Lady Margot despite wanting to strangle her. And Lady Margot herself. Inez's expression soured. Ruthless. Beautiful. Completely convinced she's destined to become the next Duchess of Thornhaven. She's been positioning herself for years, ever since her first season, really. Corvin was already grieving our mother then, so he wasn't exactly receptive. But Margot is patient. She plays long games. Your mother died during your brother's first season? I was 3. I don't remember her at all. Inez's voice was matter-of-fact, but something lurked beneath the surface. Corvin remembers. He was 12 when she passed, old enough to understand what we'd lost, young enough to be shaped by it. The evening hours were the most challenging, because evening hours belonged to meals, and meals meant facing the Duke. He appeared each night precisely at 7, perfectly dressed, perfectly courteous, perfectly distant. He inquired about her comfort, asked after her progress with Madame Vellicott, listened to Inez's chatter with apparent attention. But his eyes remained elsewhere, fixed on some middle distance that none of them could breach. 3 nights into her residence, Serene decided she'd had enough of polite silence. Your Grace, she said, interrupting a discussion of upcoming social obligations. I'd like to borrow a book from your library, if that's acceptable. He looked at her, actually looked at her, for the first time since they'd shaken hands in his grandmother's sitting room. The library is available to all members of the household. I wasn't certain I qualified as a member. Surprise registered in his expression. "You're living under this roof. You qualify." "Then I'll visit after dinner, unless that would disturb you. The library is large. I doubt we'd disturb each other." It was dismissal dressed as permission, but Seren accepted it without argument. Progress came in small steps. She found him there 3 hours later, as she'd suspected she would. The library at night was different from how she'd first encountered it. Quieter, more intimate, and lit by scattered candles that created pools of warmth amid the shadows. He sat in a leather chair by the fire, a book open in his lap, though his eyes were fixed on the flames rather than the pages. "Miss Holloway." He didn't rise, but gestured toward the shelves. "Help yourself. The collection is organized by subject, then author, though my father's system had certain eccentricities that take time to decipher." Seren moved to the nearest shelf, trailing her fingers along the spines. "How long did it take you to learn?" "Learn what?" "His system, his eccentricities." Silence. When she glanced back, his jaw had tightened almost imperceptibly. "I'm still learning." She pulled down a volume at random, poetry from the look of it, and settled into the chair opposite his. The fire crackled between them, filling the silence with something warmer than awkwardness. "You don't have to sit with me," he said after several minutes. "You can take the book to your room." "I could, but these chairs are comfortable, and I've spent 3 days being measured, instructed, and prepared for a role I didn't choose. Reading by a fire seems like a reasonable reward." His expression shifted, not quite a smile, but something adjacent to it. "Being a charity case is demanding work? Being anyone's case is demanding, charitable or otherwise." He actually laughed at that, a short, surprised sound, as though he'd forgotten he knew how. It transformed his face entirely, softening the harsh angles, illuminating something warm beneath the ice. Then it was gone, and he was studying her with unsettling intensity. "Why did you agree to this?" "I told you. And your grandmother. Security. Opportunity. A future better than the one I was facing. Those are reasons. They're not why." Seren set down her book, meeting his gaze directly. "What do you mean?" "You could have negotiated for money. Asked for a settlement that would have solved your family's problems immediately. Instead, you asked for references and connections, tools for building rather than receiving." He leaned forward slightly. "That suggests you're not interested in being rescued. You're interested in rescuing yourself." She hadn't expected to be seen so clearly. "My father used to say that gifts create dependence, but skills create freedom." The words came slowly, drawn from somewhere deeper than she usually allowed. "He taught me everything he knew. Reading, writing, mathematics, history, languages. Not because he expected me to use them, but because he believed they were mine to keep. Things no one could take away." And then he died. The bluntness should have stung. Instead, it felt like acknowledgement. And then he died. And we discovered that knowledge doesn't pay rent, and skills don't buy medicine, and everything he'd given me was worthless in the face of practical reality. Serene's voice stayed steady through sheer force of will. "So I learned to sew, to mend, to make myself useful in ways that translated to actual coins. But I never stopped wanting something more. And this," he gestured vaguely at the room, the house, the entire impossible situation, "is your something more? This is my opportunity. What I make of it is still undetermined." They sat in silence, but it was different now. Not the empty silence of strangers occupying shared space, but something more complicated, more weighted. "My father loved this room," he said finally. "He spent hours here, reading, thinking, and avoiding my grandmother's endless social demands. She never understood it. She thought books were a waste of time, distractions from duty and obligation. What did he think? He thought duty without reflection was mindless, and obligation without understanding was tyranny. The Duke's gaze moved to the shelves, seeing something beyond the leather spines and gilt lettering. He wrote that, actually, in a journal he kept. I found it after he died, hidden behind a false panel in his desk. Seren waited, sensing that he was approaching something fragile. The journal was full of his thoughts, his fears, his hopes for us, for Inez and me. His voice dropped. His disappointments that I would never know about, because he'd never told me. All those years we had together, and there was so much he kept hidden. Maybe he was protecting you. Maybe he didn't trust me enough to share it. The bitterness surfaced briefly before being suppressed. It doesn't matter now. He's gone. The journal exists, and I've read it so many times I could recite passages from memory. What do the passages say? He looked at her then, really looked, and something cracked in his carefully maintained facade. They say he was proud of me. They say he worried I was too serious, too controlled, too afraid of feeling things deeply. They say, his voice caught, they say he loved me, that he should have told me more often, that his greatest regret was letting duty eclipse connection. The fire popped, shadows danced, and Seren understood, finally, why the Duke of Thornhaven had retreated so completely from living. He wasn't just grieving his father, he was grieving all the conversations they'd never had, all the truths that had come too late, all the years of careful distance that could never be reclaimed. "I'm sorry," she said, and meant it. "So am I." He closed his book with quiet finality. "The dinner at the Fairchild estate is in 4 days. It will be your first public appearance as a guest of this family. Lady Margot will be there, watching for any weakness she can exploit." The shift back to practical matters was abrupt, but Seren recognized it for what it was: retreat from territory, too vulnerable to occupy for long. "I'll be ready. Will you? Your grandmother has threatened to destroy me if I fail. Your sister has been drilling me on social hierarchies until I dream in titles and obligations. And you?" She paused, uncertain how to finish. "I what? You've given me a reason to succeed that has nothing to do with my own interests." His brow furrowed. "Meaning?" "Meaning I've seen what you're carrying, and I think you deserve to carry less." She rose, book in hand. "Good night, Your Grace." She was at the door when his voice stopped her. "Corvin," she turned. "I'm sorry?" "My name. If we're going to maintain this fiction of family friendship, you should probably use it, at least in private." Something warm bloomed in her chest, small but unmistakable. "Good night, Corvin." His name felt strange on her tongue, intimate in a way she hadn't expected. She left before he could see how much it affected her. Behind her, she didn't see him watching the door long after it closed, or the way his hand had moved unconsciously toward the space where she'd been sitting. But the fire noticed, and the books noticed, and somewhere in the depths of the house, a clock chimed midnight, marking another day survived, another wall breached, another step toward something neither of them was ready to name. The Fairchild estate blazed with light. Seren stood at the entrance, her gloved fingers resting on Corvin's arm, trying to remember everything Inez had taught her, while simultaneously forgetting everything her instinct screamed about running in the opposite direction. The gown Madame Velicat had created was a masterwork, deep emerald silk that caught the candlelight like captured forest shadows, cut to emphasize elegance rather than provocation. Pearl drops adorned her ears. Her dark hair had been swept into an intricate arrangement that made her neck look impossibly long. She looked like she belonged. She didn't feel like she belonged. "Breathe," Corvin murmured, so quietly only she could hear. "You're gripping my arm hard enough to leave bruises." She forced her fingers to relax. "Apologies. I'm not accustomed to being stared at." They're not staring at you. They're staring at us. His voice carried that familiar edge of controlled neutrality. The mysterious Miss Holloway, finally revealed. They've been speculating for days. Wonderful. I've always wanted to be speculation fodder. Wry humor touched the corner of his mouth. You'll survive. You've already survived my grandmother. They entered the grand hall together, and conversation rippled outward from their arrival, like stones dropped in still water. Seren felt the weight of assessment pressing from every direction. Curious gazes, raised eyebrows, fans lifted to conceal whispered commentary. The Dowager had prepared her for this. Inez had prepared her for this. But preparation and reality were vastly different creatures. Duke of Thornhaven. Their host materialized from the crowd, a portly man with kind eyes and an impressive mustache. Delighted you could attend, and this must be the young lady everyone's been discussing. Lord Fairchild, may I present Miss Seren Holloway? Miss Holloway, the Earl of Fairchild. Seren curtsied precisely as she'd been taught. My lord, thank you for including me in your invitation. Any friend of the Ashford family is welcome in my home. Lord Fairchild's smile seemed genuine. I knew your father, actually. Tobias Holloway, wasn't it? Tutored my nephew for a season. Brilliant man. Tragic loss. Serene's breath caught. She hadn't expected anyone here to actually know her family. You knew my father? Shared several dinners at my brother's estate. He had the most remarkable memory for classical texts. Could recite entire passages of Virgil without hesitation. Lord Fairchild's expression softened. I was sorry to hear of his passing. He deserved better than illness took from him. Thank you, my lord. Her voice emerged steadier than she'd feared. He would have been honored to know you remembered him. Lord Fairchild patted her hand with grandfatherly warmth. Go. Enjoy the evening. And know that not everyone here cares more about circumstances than character. It was a kindness she hadn't anticipated, a crack in the wall of aristocratic judgment she'd been bracing against. As they moved deeper into the gathering, Seren felt something in her chest begin to unclench. You're doing well, Corvin said quietly. Lord Fairchild was unexpectedly kind. Lord Fairchild is unexpectedly kind to everyone. It's his defining characteristic. But there was approval in his voice, warm beneath the measured words. The real tests come later. He was right. Lady Margot appeared within the hour, resplendent in rose-colored silk, her smile sharp enough to cut glass. Your Grace, Miss Holloway, how lovely to see you both. Lady Margot. Seren inclined her head with careful politeness. What a beautiful gown. Isn't it? Shipped directly from Paris. One must maintain certain standards. Her gaze swept Seren's emerald dress with barely concealed disdain. Your seamstress did adequate work, considering the time constraints. Madame Velicott, wasn't it? She usually serves families of somewhat higher caliber, but I suppose she makes exceptions. She makes masterpieces, Seren replied evenly, as anyone with eyes can observe. Something dangerous flickered in Margot's expression. How confident you seem, for someone so new to these circles. Confidence isn't circumstantial, Lady Margot. It's constitutional. Beside her, Corvin made a sound that might have been a suppressed laugh. Margot's smile crystallized into something colder. We'll see how long that constitution lasts. These circles can be demanding. Not everyone adapts successfully. I appreciate your concern for my adaptation. Concern? Margot's laugh tinkled like breaking glass. Merely observation. The season is long, Miss Holloway. Plenty of time for circumstances to reveal themselves. She glided away, leaving threat hanging in the air like perfume. That went well, Seren murmured. You held your ground. That's more than most manage with Margot. Corvin's hand pressed briefly against the small of her back, there and gone, but warm enough to notice. Come. The dinner gong will sound soon, and my grandmother will want us seated properly. Dinner was elaborate, conversation was strategic, and Seren navigated both with increasing confidence. She found allies in unexpected places. Lord Fairchild's nephew, who remembered her father fondly. An elderly countess who appreciated Seren's knowledge of poetry. A young viscount who seemed genuinely interested in her observations about London's social geography. By the time the meal concluded and guests dispersed for after-dinner entertainments, she felt almost comfortable. Almost. Walk with me, Corvin said, appearing at her elbow as she stood contemplating a landscape painting. There's a gallery on the second floor. Quieter. They climbed the stairs together, leaving the noise behind. The gallery he'd mentioned was lined with portraits, generations of Fairchilds staring down from gilded frames, their expressions ranging from severe to benevolent. You survived, he said, stopping before a window that overlooked the darkened gardens. Barely. More than barely. You impressed people tonight. Lord Ashwick told me you discussed economic theory during the fish course. He seemed interested, and economic theory is something I actually understand. Corvin turned to face her, his gray eyes catching the moonlight. Why? Why do I understand economic theory? Why do you understand anything you understand? Your father was a tutor, not a university professor. Most tutors teach basic literacy and arithmetic. Yours apparently taught classical languages, poetry, economic theory, and what else? Seren felt heat rise to her cheeks. History, philosophy, natural sciences when he could find the texts. He believed education was wasted if it remained narrow. He sounds remarkable. He was? The familiar ache surfaced, but softer than usual. He also believed I deserved the same education as any son he might have had. My mother thought he was mad. What use did a girl have for Virgil and economic theory? But he insisted. Said ignorance was the only true poverty, and he wouldn't leave his daughter impoverished. Corvin was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice had lost its careful neutrality. My father believed something similar. That education was freedom. That understanding the world gave you power over your circumstances rather than the reverse. They would have liked each other. Perhaps. He moved closer, near enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. You make me remember things I'd rather forget. I'm sorry. Don't be. His gaze held hers with unsettling intensity. Forgetting hasn't helped. Maybe remembering is what I actually need. The air between them thickened with something unspoken. Corvin. There you are. Inez's voice shattered the moment, her footsteps echoing as she hurried toward them. Grandmother is asking for you. Something about the Pemberton situation. I don't know the details, but she looks murderous. Corvin stepped back, the mask of control sliding firmly into place. Of course. Miss Holloway, if you'll excuse me. He was gone before she could respond, leaving Seren alone with his sister and the lingering sensation of standing on the edge of something vast. What was that? Inez asked, her eyes far too knowing. Nothing. A conversation. That wasn't nothing. That was the opposite of nothing. Inez linked her arm through Seren's, her smile brilliant. This is going to be even more interesting than I thought. 3 weeks passed in a blur of social engagements and careful performances. Seren attended dinners and musicals, garden parties, and afternoon teas. She learned to navigate conversation like a chess game, anticipating moves 3 steps ahead. She earned grudging acceptance from some quarters and active hostility from others. Through it all, She maintained the fiction of family friendship with increasing ease. And through it all, something shifted between her and Corvin. It happened in small moments, glances that lingered too long, conversations that ventured too deep, accidental touches that neither of them rushed to end. He began appearing in the library when she read there. She began taking breakfast at the table rather than in her room. They walked the gardens together in the afternoon, discussing everything from philosophy to the proper care of roses. She was beginning to feel, against all wisdom, that she might actually belong. The Dowager watched with calculating silence. Inez watched with barely contained glee. Lady Margot watched with escalating fury. It was at the Pemberton Musicale that Margot finally struck. Serene had excused herself to find the retiring room, navigating the crowded corridors with practiced ease. She was halfway there when a hand seized her arm and pulled her into an empty parlor. Lady Margot stood between her and the door, her beautiful face twisted with cold rage. "Enough," she said. "This little performance of yours ends tonight." Serene yanked her arm free. "I don't know what you mean. Don't insult us both with pretended ignorance." Margot moved closer, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "I've had you investigated, Miss Holloway. I know exactly what you are. A seamstress's daughter playing dress-up, pretending to belong in a world that will never accept you. Your father died in debt. Your brother is a gambler. Your mother takes in mending to pay the rent." The words landed like blows, each one precisely aimed. "My circumstances are no secret." "No, but your ambitions are." Margot's smile was cruel. "You think I can't see what you're doing? Worming your way into his affections, making yourself indispensable, and hoping he'll forget his duty and his position long enough to make a catastrophic mistake. I'm not. You're exactly what you appear to be, a fortune hunter, a social climber, a desperate little nobody who stumbled into an opportunity and decided to exploit it." Margot stepped closer still, her perfume cloying in the confined space. "But here's what you don't understand, Miss Holloway. You're temporary, a distraction. When the season ends and reality reasserts itself, you'll be sent back to your grimy little shop with nothing but memories of what you couldn't keep." Serene's hands trembled, but she kept her voice steady. "You don't know anything about me. I know enough. I know that Corvin has spent 8 months drowning in grief, and you appeared at the exact moment he was vulnerable enough to grasp at anything that made him feel alive again." Margot's eyes glittered. "But grief fades. Reality returns. And when it does, he'll see you for what you are, a momentary lapse in judgment, an embarrassment to be quietly forgotten. If you're so certain, why confront me at all?" "Because I'm tired of waiting." Margot's voice hardened. "Because every day you remain in his orbit is another day his reputation suffers by association with you. Because the Dowager may tolerate your presence for her own strategic purposes, but she would never sanction an actual match between her grandson and a tradesman's daughter." The silence stretched between them sharp as broken glass. "Ask yourself this, Miss Holloway. When has a story like yours ever ended happily? When has a girl from Meridian Street ever become a duchess? When has love, if that's what you're foolish enough to call it, ever triumphed over circumstance and duty and the relentless machinery of social expectation?" She left before Serene could respond, her departure as controlled as everything else about her. Serene stood alone in the empty parlor, Margot's words echoing through her mind. Fortune hunter, social climber, temporary, embarrassment. The worst part was that she couldn't entirely disagree. She had entered this arrangement for opportunity, for security, for a future better than the one she'd been facing. Whatever feelings had developed since Whatever connection she'd begun to imagine, none of it changed the fundamental reality of her situation. She was a seamstress's daughter, pretending to be something she wasn't. And pretense, no matter how well executed, always eventually collapsed. The door opened behind her. Corvin stood in the doorway, his expression concerned. "Inez said you disappeared. Are you—" He stopped, taking in her pale face, her trembling hands. "What happened?" "Nothing. I'm fine." "You're not fine. You're shaking." He stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. "Tell me." But she couldn't. Not now. Not when Margot's words were still fresh, still bleeding. "I just need a moment," she said. "Please." He studied her for a long moment, clearly unconvinced, but he nodded. "I'll wait outside. Take whatever time you need." It was a kindness she didn't deserve, not if Margot was right about what she really was. But when he left, closing the door gently behind him, Seren didn't feel grateful. She felt terrified, because somewhere in the past 3 weeks, pretense had become something else entirely, and she had no idea how to survive what came next. She avoided Corvin for 3 days. It wasn't difficult. The house was large enough to disappear in, and he was busy enough with estate matters and parliamentary obligations that their paths rarely crossed unless deliberately arranged. She took breakfast in her room. She retired early each evening. She pleaded headaches when Inez suggested outings. On the 4th day, he found her in the garden. "You're hiding." Seren looked up from the rose bush she'd been pretending to examine. He stood on the path behind her, dressed in riding clothes, his dark hair windswept from exercise. The sight of him made her chest ache in ways she couldn't afford. "I'm not hiding. I'm admiring the gardens." "You've been admiring the gardens for 3 days, from increasingly remote locations." He moved closer, his gray eyes searching her face. "What happened at the Pemberton Music Hall?" "Nothing happened." "Something happened. You disappeared halfway through the evening and returned looking like you'd seen a ghost. You've barely spoken since." He stopped within arm's reach. "Tell me." Seren turned back to the roses, unable to meet his gaze. "Lady Margot and I had a conversation." "What kind of conversation?" "The honest kind." The words came out bitter. "She reminded me of certain realities I'd been trying to forget." "Such as?" "Such as the fact that I'm a seamstress's daughter, pretending to belong in a world that will never accept me. Such as the fact that this," she gestured vaguely, encompassing the garden, the house, everything, "is temporary. Such as the fact that when reality reasserts itself, I'll return to Meridian Street with nothing but memories of what I couldn't keep." Silence fell between them. When she finally looked at him, his expression had gone dangerously still. "She said those things to you. She said true things to me. There's a difference." "No." He moved closer, near enough to touch. "There isn't. Because those things aren't true. Not the parts that matter. Corvin, you're not pretending." His voice had dropped to something raw, urgent. "Maybe you were at the beginning. Both of us were. But not anymore. What you are in this house, with my family, with me, that's not performance. That's you. You don't know me. Not really. You know a version I've constructed for. I know you read poetry by firelight and forget to eat when you're absorbed in a book. I know you argue economic theory with elderly viscounts and make them enjoy it. I know you taught yourself 3 languages from borrowed texts and can quote Virgil in the original Latin." His hand caught her chin, tilting her face toward his. "I know you look at me like I'm worth saving, even when I can barely remember why that might be true." Her breath caught. "This is dangerous." "I know. It can't lead anywhere good." "Probably not. Your grandmother would never—" "My grandmother doesn't get to decide what I want." His thumb traced her cheekbone, featherlight. "For the first time in 8 months, I want something." specifically, desperately, and I'm terrified of it. Why terrified? Because wanting means losing. Because caring means grief. Because the last time I let myself feel something this strongly, his voice cracked. My father died, and I learned exactly how much love costs. Serene's heart shattered and reformed in the space between his words. So I built walls, he continued. I retreated. I performed duty and obligation because those were safe, predictable, controllable, incapable of causing the kind of pain that grief causes. I told myself I'd never let anyone close enough to hurt me again. And then? And then you fell through my door. The faintest smile surfaced. Completely unexpected, entirely inconvenient. The last thing I wanted, and the only thing that's made me feel alive since I lost him. The garden around them seemed to hold its breath. This is madness, Serene whispered. My father used to say that idealism was a form of madness, but a necessary one. That's not idealism, that's rationalization. Maybe. He leaned closer, his forehead nearly touching hers. But I'm tired of being rational. I'm tired of walls and distance and performing emotions I don't feel while suppressing the ones I do. I'm tired of being so careful that I forget how to live. What are you saying? I'm saying I love you. The words emerged, rough, unpolished, and absolutely genuine. I'm saying I've been falling since the night we met, and I've been too afraid to admit it. I'm saying that whatever Margot told you about being temporary, she's wrong. You're the first permanent thing I've wanted in longer than I can remember. Tears spilled down her cheeks. You can't love me. You're a duke. I'm nobody. The mathematics don't work. Damn the mathematics. His hands framed her face, gentle but insistent. Damn the expectations and the social hierarchies, and every person who thinks they get to decide what's possible for us. I've spent my whole life doing what was expected, following rules, maintaining propriety, and it left me empty and grieving and half alive. Corvin, you make me whole. His voice broke on the word. You make me want to be present instead of distant. You make me believe that maybe, there's more to existence than duty and loss. And I know it's impossible, and I know it's selfish, and I know I have no right to ask you to stay, when staying means fighting battles you never signed up for. She kissed him. It wasn't calculated, or gentle, or any of the things a proper first kiss should be. It was desperate and claiming, and full of everything neither of them had been brave enough to say. His arms wrapped around her, pulling her close, and she felt the walls he'd built crumbling under the pressure of contact. When they finally parted, both breathing ragged, reality came crashing back. They were in a garden at Thornhaven House, visible to anyone who cared to look from the windows. The Duke of Thornhaven and his temporary guest, kissing like they meant it. Because they did mean it. Tomorrow, he said, his voice rough. We need to talk to my grandmother, properly, about what this means. She'll never approve. Maybe not. But I won't hide this. I won't pretend it's something less than it is. His eyes held hers, fierce with conviction. Whatever comes next, we face it together. Serene wanted to believe him. She wanted it so desperately that the wanting felt like drowning. Together, she whispered, and let herself hope. She fell asleep that night, believing tomorrow would change everything. She was right, but not in the way she'd hoped. The conversation never happened. Serene woke the next morning to a letter delivered with her breakfast tray, her mother's handwriting, shaky with urgency. Dearest Serene, your brother has done something terrible. I cannot explain in writing. You must come home immediately. Tell no one where you've gone. Trust no one with the details. Please hurry. Mother. The words blurred as Seren read them again, then a third time. Jonathan. Of course it was Jonathan, always chasing schemes, always promising that the next opportunity would be different, always leaving destruction in his wake. But trust no one gave her pause. Her mother wasn't given to dramatics. If she'd written those words, she meant them. Serene dressed quickly, her mind racing through possibilities. She should tell Corvin. She should explain the situation and ask for help. He had resources, connections, the kind of power that could solve problems mere mortals couldn't touch. But trust no one echoed through her thoughts. And beneath it, a darker whisper. He'll see you for what you are, a momentary lapse in judgment, an embarrassment to be quietly forgotten. What if Jonathan's trouble was worse than usual? What if it touched the family in ways that couldn't be fixed? What if Corvin's association with her became a liability rather than a choice? She could spare him that. She could handle her own disasters without dragging him into the wreckage. She wrote 2 letters. The first went to Inez. Dear Inez, a family emergency requires my immediate attention. I'm sorry I couldn't say goodbye properly. Please know that these weeks have meant more to me than I can express. You are the sister I never had. Thank you for everything. Serene. The second was harder. She wrote it 4 times before the words stopped feeling like lies. Corvin, by the time you read this, I'll be gone. Please don't try to find me. What we discussed yesterday, what we felt, it was real. It was more real than anything I've ever experienced. But reality isn't kind to feelings, and circumstances don't bend because we want them to. My family needs me. That need doesn't come with explanations or timelines or the promise of return. It simply is. I know you'll think I'm running. Maybe I am. But I'm running toward something too. Toward the people who depend on me. Toward the life I left behind. Toward the responsibilities that existed before you and will continue after. You asked me to stay. I wanted to. I want to still. So desperately that leaving feels like removing my own heart. But love isn't about wanting. It's about choosing what's right even when it costs everything. Please don't hate me. Seren, she left both letters on her writing desk, sealed and addressed. Then she gathered her original dress, the one she'd worn the night they met, and slipped from the house before anyone stirred. The morning fog wrapped around her as she walked, muffling sound, blurring edges. She carried nothing but the clothes on her back and the ache of something beautiful that had ended before it truly began. Behind her, Thornhaven House slept on, unaware that everything had changed. She reached Meridian Street just as the sun broke through the clouds. Her mother was waiting at the door, face pale and drawn with worry. She pulled Seren inside without a word, locking the door behind them with trembling hands. Jonathan, Seren asked. Gone, fled, left behind debts we cannot pay, and enemies we cannot appease. The details spilled out in fragments. A gambling debt, enormous, ruinous, owed to men who didn't forgive failure. A scheme gone wrong, threats delivered, Jonathan vanishing in the night, leaving only a note promising to fix everything, but providing no explanation of how. How much? Seren asked. Her mother's face crumpled. Everything. More than everything. They've given us 3 days. 3 days to produce money they didn't have. 3 days before collectors came to take whatever they could seize. 3 days before the life they'd scraped together collapsed entirely. Serene's mind raced through impossible options. She could go back to Corvin. She could explain, ask for help, and let him save them with his impossible resources. But that would confirm everything Margot had said. Fortune hunter, social climber, a desperate little nobody exploiting his vulnerability. She couldn't do it. She wouldn't. Whatever she'd shared with Corvin, however real it had been, she wouldn't reduce it to a transaction. She wouldn't let him think, even for a moment, that she'd only wanted him for what he could provide. "We'll figure something out," she told her mother, though she had no idea what. "Will we?" Seren pulled her into a fierce embrace, hiding her own despair behind a mask of determination. "We always do." Outside, the city continued its indifferent rhythm, unaware that somewhere in its vast machinery, a heart was quietly breaking. And miles away, in a grand house filled with books and memories, a duke woke to find 2 letters on an empty desk and realized that the woman he loved had vanished without a word. Corvin read her letter 7 times. Each reading changed nothing. The words remained the same, carefully chosen, deliberately ambiguous, offering no explanation he could grasp or address. Family emergency. Don't try to find me. Please don't hate me. How could he hate her? How could he feel anything but the vast, consuming emptiness of her absence? She's gone. Inez appeared in his doorway, her own letter clutched in her hand, her eyes red-rimmed. She left without telling us, without letting us help. I know. Why would she do that? After everything. After yesterday. Inez broke off, staring at him. What happened yesterday? Corvin couldn't answer. The words were trapped somewhere between his chest and his throat, too massive to force through the narrow passage of speech. He'd kissed her. He'd told her he loved her. He'd promised they'd face whatever came together. And she'd left anyway. The Dowager found him in his study 3 hours later, staring at nothing. "You look worse than you did after your father died." "Thank you for that observation." It wasn't a criticism. She settled into the chair across from his desk, her expression unreadable. It was an acknowledgement. "You actually cared about this one." "This one?" He laughed without humor. "Her name is Seren. And yes, I cared about her." Cared. Past tense? She left. She asked me not to find her. She made her choice clear. Did she? The Dowager's gaze sharpened. That letter reads like someone protecting something, not someone walking away from it. Corvin looked up, surprised. You read her letter? I read both letters. Inez brought hers to me, distraught, and yours was sitting on your desk when I came looking for explanations. She showed no remorse. That girl was not running away from you. She was running away from something else. A family emergency. She said almost nothing. That's the point. The Dowager leaned forward. When someone leaves because they want to leave, they explain, they justify, they make certain you understand why. When someone leaves because they have no other choice, they're vague. They protect. They sacrifice their own happiness to shield others from complications they don't fully understand. Hope stirred, fragile and dangerous. You think she was protecting me? I think she was protecting everyone. Herself, her family, you, this household. Whatever emergency called her home, she clearly believed involving us would make things worse. Then I should respect her wishes. Should you? The Dowager's voice hardened. You've spent 8 months respecting wishes. Your father's wish that you manage the estates. My wish that you consider marriage. Society's wish that you maintain propriety. How has that served you? Corvin had no answer. That girl woke you up, the Dowager continued. For the first time since your father died, you were present, engaged, alive. And now you're going to let her vanish because she asked you to? She has the right to make her own choices. She has the right to make informed choices. And right now, she's making choices based on fear and pride and whatever crisis her family is facing, not based on what she actually wants. The Dowager rose, fixing him with a fierce stare. Go after her. Find out what's happening. Give her the chance to choose with full knowledge of her options. And if she chooses to leave anyway, then at least you'll know. At least you won't spend the rest of your life wondering what might have been if you'd been brave enough to fight." She moved toward the door, then paused. "Your father regretted his caution. He wrote about it in that journal you found. All the things he wished he'd said. All the moments he wished he'd seized. Don't make his mistakes. Corvin, don't let fear steal your chance at happiness." She left him alone with his thoughts and the terrible weight of decision. An hour later, he summoned Wren, the investigator his father had used for discreet matters. "Find everything you can about the Holloway family. The mother, the brother, any debts or troubles or enemies. I want answers by nightfall." The answers, when they came, were worse than he'd imagined. Jonathan Holloway owed £3,000 to Marcus Fell, a moneylender notorious for collecting debts through violence when payment failed. The deadline was tomorrow, and the Holloway family had nothing even approaching that sum. Corvin didn't hesitate. He summoned his banker, arranged the funds, and rode through the night toward Meridian Street. He found the shop just as dawn broke, a modest storefront with Holloway Alterations painted in fading letters. He knocked, then knocked again, then pounded until the door finally opened. Serene stood there in her original dress, shadows under her eyes, her expression shifting from confusion to shock to something that looked dangerously like hope. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered. "You shouldn't have left without telling me why." "I told you. You told me nothing." He stepped closer, not touching her, but near enough to feel her warmth. "You said family emergency. You said don't find me. You didn't say that your brother owed £3,000 to Marcus Fell, and you were trying to protect me from the scandal of association." Her face went white. "How do you— I have resources. I used them." He reached into his coat, withdrawing a folded paper. "The debt is paid. Fell has been compensated and informed that any further contact with your family will result in consequences he won't enjoy. Your brother's mess is cleaned up. You can't just— I already did." Serene's hands trembled as she took the paper, a receipt for payment, signed and witnessed. £3,000, a sum that would have taken her family decades to accumulate. "Why?" Her voice cracked. "Why would you do this?" "Because I love you." The words came easily this time, practiced through a sleepless night of riding and worrying and praying she hadn't destroyed everything by leaving. "Because your problems are my problems. Because I told you we'd face things together, and I meant it, even when you tried to face them alone. I didn't want you to think—" She broke off, struggling for control. "Margot said I was a fortune hunter. She said I was exploiting your grief. She said, I don't care what Margot said." He closed the distance between them, cupping her face in his hands. "I care what you say. I care what you want. I care whether you're going to keep running away every time things get difficult, or whether you're going to trust me enough to let me help." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "I was trying to protect you. I don't need protection. I need you." He rested his forehead against hers. "Stay. Fight. Let me love you without hiding, without pretense, without worrying about what everyone else thinks. Your grandmother sent me after you, told me not to make my father's mistakes." Serene laughed through her tears, a broken, beautiful sound. "She did? She's terrifying, but apparently romantic when it suits her purposes." From inside the shop, Serene's mother appeared, a worn woman with her daughter's dark hair and gentle eyes. She took in the scene with quiet assessment. "You're the Duke," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, ma'am. And you've come for my daughter. If she'll have me." The older woman studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "She reads your letters, all hours of the night, reading and rereading like they're scripture." A faint smile crossed her weathered features. "I've never seen her love anything the way she loves you." Serene made a strangled sound. "Mother, hush. I'm old enough to recognize when fate has made a decision." Mrs. Holloway stepped back, gesturing them inside. "Come in. Both of you. We have arrangements to discuss." The shop was small, crowded, utterly unlike the grandeur of Thornhaven House. But as Corvin followed Serene inside, her hand finding his like it had always belonged there, none of that mattered. They had found each other. They had chosen each other. Everything else was simply details. The Sinclair Ball was the event of the season. Everyone who mattered would be there. Everyone who didn't matter desperately wished they were. And at the center of every whispered conversation stood the same question. What had happened between the Duke of Thornhaven and the mysterious Miss Holloway? The gossip had been building for weeks. She'd vanished from his household under unclear circumstances. He'd disappeared for 3 days without explanation. Lady Margot had been seen looking alternately triumphant and thunderous. The Dowager Duchess had refused all comment. Now, finally, answers would come. Serene stood at the top of the grand staircase, her gloved hand resting on Corvin's arm, her heart pounding so loudly she was certain everyone could hear it. The gown was new, commissioned secretly by the Dowager, delivered that morning without warning. Deep midnight blue, scattered with silver embroidery that caught the light like captured stars. Sapphires at her throat, borrowed from the family collection, offered by Inez with tears and laughter. She looked like a duchess. She still didn't feel like one. "Ready?" Corvin murmured. "No. Neither am I." He smiled, that rare, genuine expression that transformed his entire face. "Shall we?" They descended together, and the ballroom fell silent. Hundreds of eyes tracked their progress. Fans paused mid-flutter. Conversations died mid-word. Serene felt the weight of judgment pressing from every direction, but Corvin's hand remained steady on hers, anchoring her to something more solid than social opinion. Lady Margot materialized from the crowd, resplendent in crimson, her expression carefully controlled. "Your Grace. Miss Holloway, how lovely to see you both." "Lady Margot." Serene inclined her head with perfect politeness. What a beautiful gown. Calculation flickered behind Margot's eyes. Recognition, perhaps, that the same words had been exchanged once before, with very different power dynamics. "I understand there have been developments," Margot continued, her voice carrying just enough to reach nearby listeners. "The rumor mills have been quite active." "Have they?" Corvin's tone was utterly neutral. "I rarely attend to rumors." "Perhaps you should. Some are suggesting quite extraordinary things about your intentions toward Miss Holloway." Margot's smile sharpened. "Things that would be considered unprecedented, even inappropriate." The surrounding guests leaned closer, hungry for scandal. Corvin looked at Serene. Something passed between them, question and answer, fear and courage, love and trust. Then he turned back to Margot, and his voice rang out clear enough to reach every corner of the ballroom. "Unprecedented, perhaps. Inappropriate? Never." He stepped forward, and the crowd parted like water around a ship's prow. "Though since you've raised the subject so publicly, Lady Margot, perhaps this is the appropriate moment to address the rumors directly." Serene's heart stopped beating. Corvin turned to face the assembled guests, hundreds of society's finest, watching with barely concealed fascination. "My father spent his final months writing in a journal that I discovered after his death. He wrote about regrets, about words he wished he'd spoken, moments he wished he'd seized, love he wished he'd expressed more freely." The silence was absolute. "I've spent the past year honoring his memory by repeating his mistakes, by hiding behind duty, by choosing safety over feeling, by convincing myself that control was more important than connection." His gaze found Serene's, holding her with intensity that made breathing difficult. And then I met a woman who fell through my door by accident and changed everything. A woman who taught me that grief doesn't require isolation, that love doesn't require protection from itself, that the greatest risk isn't feeling too much, it's feeling nothing at all. He moved toward her, stopping close enough to touch. Miss Seren Holloway is not from my world. She doesn't have titles, or fortune, or the connections that society deems necessary. What she has is brilliance and courage, and a heart so generous that she tried to protect me from her own troubles, rather than ask for help. A murmur rippled through the crowd. I don't care about her circumstances. I care about her. He took her hand, raising it to his lips, and I'm asking her, in front of everyone who matters and everyone who doesn't, if she'll honor me by becoming my wife. The world held its breath. Seren looked at the man before her, the Duke who had lied for her, fought for her, crossed the city to find her when she'd tried to disappear. She saw the vulnerability beneath his composure, the hope beneath his certainty, the love that had grown from accident into inevitability. Yes, she said, 1,000 times. Yes. He kissed her then, properly, thoroughly, with complete disregard for propriety or protocol or the hundreds of eyes watching. And when they finally broke apart, the ballroom erupted into applause. Not everyone clapped, of course. Lady Margot stood frozen, her face a mask of barely controlled fury. Several older matrons exchanged scandalized glances. Whispers would spread. Criticisms would be leveled, and doors would close. But enough doors would open. Enough people would see what Seren and Corvin saw. That love, genuine love, was worth more than any social calculation. The dowager appeared beside them, her expression severe, but her eyes suspiciously bright. Well, she said, that was rather dramatic. You told me not to make father's mistakes. I told you to fight for her. I didn't tell you to do it in the middle of the most important ball of the season. But she was almost smiling. Though I suppose if one must make a spectacle, one should make it properly. Inez threw herself at Seren with an embrace that nearly knocked them both over. I knew it. I knew from the moment you walked through that door that something wonderful was happening. The evening continued in a blur of congratulations and questions, and carefully navigated conversations. Some guests were genuinely warm, others were calculating advantages. Still others were simply curious about the woman who had captured the cold Duke's heart. Through it all, Corvin's hand never left hers. 6 months later, the library at Thornhaven House had always been Serene's favorite room. She sat in the leather chair by the fire. Her chair, now, in her house, surrounded by her books and her life and the family she'd never expected to find. Outside, winter had painted the gardens white, but inside, warmth wrapped around her like a promise. Corvin appeared in the doorway, a letter in his hand, and a complicated expression on his face. It's from Jonathan, he said. Seren took the letter carefully. Her brother had been in Scotland for months, sent there by the dowager's stern suggestion until he could prove he'd learned from his mistakes. His letters had been sporadic, tentative, and full of shame that was slowly transforming into genuine growth. This one was different. Dearest Seren, I found honest work, a shipping company that doesn't ask questions about past mistakes and does ask questions about future reliability. The pay is modest, but it's mine. Earned. Real. I know I've caused more trouble than I'm worth. I know you've forgiven me because that's who you are, not because I deserve it. But I'm writing to say that I'm trying. For the first time in my miserable life, I'm actually trying to be someone worthy of having a sister like you. Give my regards to the Duke. Tell him I'm grateful, even if I'm too much of a coward to say it directly. Your brother, Jonathan Seren, read it twice, then held it to her chest, tears pricking at her eyes. Good news? Corvin asked, settling into the chair beside her. The best kind. The kind that actually earns itself. He took her hand, threading his fingers through hers with the easy intimacy of marriage. Like someone else I know. Are you comparing me to my disaster of a brother? I'm comparing you to someone who started with nothing and built something extraordinary through sheer force of will and rather magnificent stubbornness. She laughed, leaning her head against his shoulder. Flattery will get you everywhere, Your Grace. I'm counting on it. The fire crackled. Snow fell softly beyond the windows. And in the quiet of the library, surrounded by books and memories, the Duke of Thornhaven held his wife and felt, for the first time in longer than he could remember, completely at peace. Later, Seren found a note tucked into her copy of Virgil, the same text her father had loved. It was in Corvin's handwriting. You fell through my door by accident. You fell into my heart by design, not yours, not mine, but something larger than both of us. Thank you for staying. Thank you for choosing. Thank you for teaching me that love is worth every risk, every fear, and every moment of vulnerability. Yours, always and only. C. She pressed the note to her lips, then tucked it back into the book, where it would wait for discovery. A small piece of evidence that fairy tales, when they happen to people brave enough to choose them, could end in something very like forever. And every year, on the anniversary of the night they met, they attended the grandest masquerade of the season. They would find a quiet corner, away from the dancing and the gossip and the endless social maneuvering, and Seren would rest her head against his shoulder, just for a moment. And Corvin would hold her, just for a moment. And they would remember, together, that the best stories don't begin with once upon a time. They begin with accidents, and they end with choice. Thank you for being here. You are the reason these stories exist, because you believe in love that chooses courage over convenience, in characters who fight for happiness despite the odds, in endings that feel earned and true. Your presence makes this space warm and welcoming, and I'm grateful for every moment you spend with these characters. Consider subscribing if you'd like more tales of unexpected love and extraordinary courage. Thank you for being here. You make this community what it is.